thank you all so much for coming out today and to be part of this panel discussion about the legacy of Vincent Persichetti, a legacy that encompasses his role as a composer, a theoretician, a pianist, a conductor, and as a teacher. And this year, Network for New Music is presenting a season that celebrates the 100th birthdays of both Vincent Persichetti and Milton Babbitt. And of course, their music is, worlds apart, but they do share something very important, and that is the reverence and the appreciation, and in some cases, adulation of their students. And today we are very happy to have a wonderful panel who are going to tell you great stories about Vincent Persichetti. And this panel is composed of 5 of Persichetti students who are also composers. We have Larry Allen Smith and Michael White, Jan Krizwicki, Marga Richter, and Behzad Ranjbaran. And of course I skipped over Daniel Dorff. He is senior editor at Theodore Presser Publishing, and he is going to share some personal and professional reflections on his relationship with Vincent Persichetti at Presser, so that should be very interesting. So the plan for today is that Jan is going to give a very brief overview, an introduction to Persicchetti's life and works, all 150 of them in 8 minutes.
And doomed from the start.
And then we'll open up the discussion with the panel. And since this is so informal, please feel free at any moment to ask a question or make a comment or whatever. I don't think we need to wait to the end, although we'll try to save a few minutes for questions. Then a little bit after 5, the panel will be over. But at that point, we're really fortunate to have a beautiful performance of Persicchetti's Serenade number 10 for flute and harp with Edward Schultz flute and Rong Tan harp. So thank you again for coming. Please turn your phones off because this is being videotaped. And Jan, I'll turn it over to you.
If you don't mind, I'm going to read my remarks. With accompaniment? Overture. Persichetti once said, "Philadelphia is my city, and Benjamin Franklin is my hero." He was a lifelong Philadelphian who attended Combs Conservatory and South Philadelphia High School and played first chair double bass in the All-Philadelphia High School Orchestra at the same time that he was already an exceptional pianist and an improviser. When he said his legs were long enough, he studied organ and at age 17 became organist for the next 16 years at Arch Street Presbyterian Church and later their choirmaster. He began teaching at the Philadelphia Conservatory at age 21 and earned a diploma from the Curtis Institute, studying conducting with Fritz Reiner, and a doctorate from the Philadelphia Conservatory. He resided in the city on Camac Street for years, then in 1949 bought a house on a hill in Fairmount Park that he graced with his own outdoor sculptures, living there until his death in 1987. He created a unique catalog of works that were performed by countless soloists and ensembles, including the Philadelphia Orchestra and others, as well as countless wind ensembles across the country, often under his own direction. Meanwhile, in 1952, he became editorial director of the Elkan Vogel Publishing House, and then for Theodore Presser Company. A few years earlier, he ceased teaching in Philadelphia to work exclusively at the Juilliard School and became a legend, a truly amazing teacher whose wide variety of pupils loved and worshipped him. Steve Reich, Thelonious Monk, Lowell Lieberman, Peter Schickley, Philip Glass, Ralph Navarra, Frank Zappa, Ellen Swillick, as well as 5 of us on this panel. This coming Tuesday evening, many of his students will come together at the Juilliard School to celebrate his life and music. Persicchetti's compositional life started early. His published Opus 1 and 2 were composed before he was 14 years old. Already he said he liked, quote, bumpy melodic lines and was crazy about music that moved along a zigzag path. This preference became a lifelong preoccupation. Persicchetti's development as a composer, however, did not follow a conventional linear progression from simple to complex or from old-fashioned to modernist, as Walter Simmons as pointed out in his book on Persichetti, William Schumann, and Peter Menon. The youthful works of 1925 were followed by a so-called silent decade of exploration and experimentation, from which no works remain. The search for his own distinctive voice was to develop rather slowly over the next 40 works that display influences of other composers, some displaying the Americana sounds of Copland and Harris. It is the following 50 or so works, composed in the 1950s, that established Persicchetti's unique voice and include the pieces he is perhaps best known for today: the Harmonium Song Cycle, the Great Concerto for Piano Four Hands, the Symphony No. 5 for strings, the Quintet for Piano and Strings, which Network will present tomorrow afternoon.
And which is never heard an original premiere and a fantastic work, and I really invite you to come hear it. It's really wonderful.
Yes, and as well as the hymns and responses of the church year, the 10th Piano Sonata, the Emily Dickinson songs, and the third string quartet, and probably most unique of all, the band works, the Divertimento, the Psalm, the Pageant, and the masterful Symphony No. 6 for band. Persichetti embraced the band just as it was receiving new respect as a medium in the hands of conductors like Frederick Fennell, and he became its most important contributor, eventually composing 14 works for band. It was a perfect match. In his typically whimsical manner, he once remarked, "I know that composers are often frightened off by the sound of the word band because of certain qualities long associated with this medium: rusty trumpets, consumptive flutes, wheezy oboes, disintegrating clarinets, fumbling yet amiable baton wavers, and gum-coated park benches." If you couple these conditions with transfigurations and disfigurations of works originally conceived for orchestra, you create a sound experience that's nearly as excruciating as a sick string quartet playing a dilettante's arrangement of a 19th century piano sonata. But when you think of the band as a huge, supple ensemble of winds and percussion, the obnoxious fat drains off and creative ideas flourish. His band works were soon held up as models for the medium by conductors and scholars alike. He understood the medium, and it provided him a wonderful outlet for his musical personality, featuring, in the words of Walter Simmons, warm chorales, transparent polytonal textures, crisp dry sonorities, and spunky syncopated rhythms, along with a pure voice soprano-like innocence. The next decade, the 1960s, brought Persichetti increased attention. In 1961, his textbook, 20th Century Harmony, Creative Aspects and Practice, was published. Still very much in print, the book is a comprehensive examination of 20th century materials, illustrated by musical examples composed for the book by Persichetti himself. The book is also the best insight into Persichetti's own musical language, almost a codification of his materials, as composer Hugo Weisskopf put it. 5 years later, Persichetti returned the musical examples into a set of variations for band entitled Masquerade. The 1960s also saw Persichetti become chair of Juilliard's composition department and later chair of the literature and materials of music department. The 1960s also produced new works of size and stature: the Concerto for Piano and Orchestra, one of my personal favorites, as well as the Piano Sonata No. 11, a freely serial work. Most of all, though, the 60s were about choral music. Almost 1/3 of the 30 works produced were choral: the Mass, the Stabat Mater, the Te Deum, the Spring and Winter Cantatas, and others. In 1969, Juilliard premiered what Persichetti considered his chef d'oeuvre, The Creation for Soloist, Chorus, and Orchestra, over an hour in length.
Has anyone ever heard that?
Oh, you were not present for that, I guess, yeah. Okay. Well, that's a work that deserves attention. The text is the composer's own compilation of 53 different mythological, scientific, poetic, and biblical writings, an outgrowth of his lifelong preoccupation with poetry, and an example of the penchant for amalgamation that so characterized his creative life. He wrote, "I tend to amalgamate the sounds around me and press them into the clay of the shaping object. I work for completeness in the architecture of all I compose. I avoid sudden flamboyance and momentary pleasure if it does not contribute to the listener. I know what I want to say because that thought means something to me. I can find fluidity in my music only when it is right for me. I've never been part of an avant-garde or any particular camp. I use everything that's around me. When all of these ideas are synthesized, they become the language of the century. I think I'm part of the new renaissance of music. He identified two temperamental poles in his work, a gracious and amiable spirit and a gritty, abrasive one. On other occasions, he put it this way: I like music to move between soft and prickly bushes. The 70s brought forth among a host of works his last Symphony No. 9, the Janiculum, and the Concerto for English Horn and Orchestra, both performed by the Philadelphia Orchestra, and in 1976, his opera, The Sibyl, was produced by the Pennsylvania Opera Theater. It is subtitled Parable 20 and draws on his other works, for example, the Emily Dickinson songs, as do many of the other parables in the series. And of course, there was the Lincoln Address of 1972, composed in a few weeks for the Nixon inauguration, but canceled when the text Persichetti chose was found to be unacceptable for political reasons relating to the Vietnam War. In the late 70s, he became absorbed with mirror writing, that is, strict contrary motion, which culminated in the Piano Sonata No. 12, the Mirror Sonata of 1980, the entire work consisting of strict mirror writing. His next fascination was with the harpsichord, and it was an intense one. He said, I've discovered a new kind of orchestra. It's called a harpsichord. It's a whole new universe. I should really say it like, I've discovered a new kind of orchestra. It's a harpsichord. That's the way he used to talk. See?
That's how you talk.
Anyway, so his very last work was the 10th Sonata, a quasi-serial work, and Dan can maybe tell us about that last harpsichord sonata later.
I can tell you one thing.
Yeah.
His publisher wished he was writing for piano, not for harpsichord.
To transcribe it.
Well, while Benjamin Franklin may have been his local hero, he said his musical heroes were Haydn and Schumann. At a Juilliard composition seminar, I remember when a student asked Persichetti what music he was most excited about at that moment, and we had been discussing Berio and other composers, and he answered, early Haydn. Not just Haydn, but early Haydn. I think we can hear that connection most in Persichetti's mischief, whimsy, exuberance, nostalgia, and fantasy. His music avoids grandiloquence, tending more towards sparse gestures and epigrammatic forms. Only 7% of his music, for example, is orchestral. His music always avoids the obvious, even to the point of becoming cryptic. He described his 25 parables as, quote, misstated stories that avoid a truth in order to tell it. He could be cryptic in conversation as well, saying something that would make you wonder what he was really intending to communicate. Perhaps his pithy way of speaking was partly the result of his lifelong absorption with poetry, as opposed to more direct narrative genres. He always said, I prefer to sing more about less rather than less about more. Very few musicians have possessed his range of interests and abilities, his command of all the musical languages of his day and his ability to demonstrate them in the roles of composer, pianist, teacher, conductor, and author. We sometimes forget he did a book about William Schumann. Hugo Weisskopf wrote, he has a phenomenal natural musicality, closely resembling Hindemith's. He can improvise entire sonatas, read the most complex scores at sight, and in the classroom, quote musical examples covering the entire range of musical literature from memory. Technical fluency is apparent from his earliest works, dating 1929. He has always written in whatever manner suits his particular conception at the time, from freely tonal through quasi-serial music, all with an equally sure hand. His spiritual life was just as all-inclusive. As Mike knows, he said he was a good Catholic, a good Jew, and a pretty good Buddhist. Yeah. Well, perhaps it's appropriate to end this very brief newsreel of Persichetti's life and thoughts with a statement he penned 5 months before his death. He wrote, I do not want a funeral service or procession or any formal religious gathering. I welcome good vibrations, warm thoughts, and spontaneous expressions. So with that as an invitation, let us proceed.
Thank you, Jan.